Yes, yes. Okay.
May I introduce before? Sorry, I introduced before we start the Professor Niall Duggan and Michele Tedeschini, that is now in America, but is Italian, and he comes from really a place near Parma. I don't remember, Modena, is it, Michele? Is it correct?
Yes, correct.
So. Now we can start if you want.
Okay. I'm Dr. Niall Duggan from the Department of Government and Politics at University College Cork, and today I'm giving a presentation on the BRICS and the New Development Bank, a game changer in the field of multilateral development finance. Today's presentation will be based on a paper that I published with a colleague in Peru and Poland in 2021, based on the structural power of the BRICS, which took a case study of the New Development Bank. And it's kind of an update on that paper. Much of my
Domenico Amirante can we'll start some words or not. What do you prefer, Domenico?
Okay. Okay, let me just say a few words. Welcome our guests, and just to thank Lucia for the organization of this very interesting seminar that is quite timely for a number of reasons, for the topic itself, but also for the political situation that now situates BRICS at the center of international politics because of what's happening in Ukraine and the turmoil that is creating the new international situation. In fact, the theme is quite appealing, and I would like to ask also to our two experts, Niall Duggan and Michele Tedeschini, what do they think about the possibility of a shift of the currency of BRICS from dollar to the ruble, the Russian currency, that now we all know that now European buyers of oil and gas are starting of thinking of paying in ruble instead that in euro or whatever. So I think those kind of considerations should be, in a way, a part of today's seminar. It's quite interesting to know if you see some signs of a sort of monetary union or anyway monetary proximity between the BRICS. That if we look at how those countries voted or didn't vote to the resolutions against Russia, this is quite intriguing for the further development of the international politics. So I think it's really very interesting now what we are going to discuss. So, of course, Niall's intervention will be more kind of technical about the new development bank, but the bank can be effectively, as you say, a game changer, not only for the BRICS, but for the international relations between the BRICS and the rest, we can say. Because it was before it was the West and the rest. Now maybe it's the BRICS and the rest. So thank you very much for being here, and I want to thank also all the BRICS Parma Research Group for the wonderful work that they are doing. So let's open the floor to Niall Duggan for his speech, please.
Thank you very much. It's definitely something that's going to be an interesting and timely topic. So hopefully it can play into those questions later. So the paper or presentation, as I mentioned, is a building up on a 2021 paper with some updates based in and around the questions that had opened this presentation. And it plays on a wider debate in and around research on the BRICS in terms of their role in global governance and how they are changing the world order in and around the structures of global governance. And global governance here is defined as a complex structure of norms and values that allow for interaction at a global level, that allow for collective action dealing with particular issues and areas of exchange between states. So essentially the nexus of organizations and rules that allow for collective action in areas such as trade, currency exchange, and international security, etc. But it's predominantly focusing on global economic governance, so the areas of global economic governance. Within that debate on the BRICS and global governance, you essentially have two major groups of literature. The first focuses on how the BRICS challenged the Western-dominated system or concept of international organizations, and how they challenge it both in terms of forcing it to reform or trying to create alternative areas of exchange or areas of interaction. Within that BRIC group in particular, there's a major focus on the BRICS role within global governance, considering it a challenger to the system, so not as something that's cooperating with the system, but viewing it solely as something that's trying to overcome or change that system. The next major group of literature predominantly focused on the groups, the individual members of the BRICS, so looking at the BRICS nations, their preferences within global governance, and how those countries can challenge the hegemonic role of the West within global governance systems. So essentially what you get when you look at literature based on the BRICS and global governance is one group that looks at the BRICS in terms of an entity within itself. So how does the BRICS act as an organization? How do BRICS created organizations interact with global governance structures? And then the other group of literature predominantly looks at individual member states and how they act within global governance, and tries to see then the BRICS as a group would interact in international organizations. The problem that we found in our research for the second group, the group that probably looks at individual member states, is that often within global governance structures, you will have individual member states of the BRICS taking actions which are contradictory or counterproductive to the actions of other states within global governance. So particularly looking at studies around the WTO, you will see that actions by China often are counterproductive to actions by India, particularly in areas of food trade, for example. So we found that trying to measure structural power or measure the ability of the BRICS to change global governance by looking at individual member states and collectivizing them into a group wasn't really that helpful. And you couldn't really measure the power of the BRICS to change global governance or to become a major power in global governance by just looking at them as individual member states. So we tried to follow the lead of this first group of literature by focusing on the BRICS as an entity within themselves. So not what are the individual member states trying to do, but what do they do when they come together as a group, institutions that they have created or initiatives they created as a group, and how do these initiatives change or influence the rules of the game. So the rules of the game here refers to a quote from North, which is the idea of the informal or formal constructs that shape human interaction, and we apply this to the level of global governance, and we try to see how do the BRICS actually influence or change the rules of global governance or global economic governance in particular. So what institutions have they created that actually can have a role in shaping the rules of how multilateral finances are developed, or how international trade is conducted, or going back to the topic that was mentioned at the very beginning, how international currencies are exchanged. So how do the BRICS go about trying to create change within these institutions? When it comes to the BRICS as a group or an entity, we're quite limited in the institutions that they have created, or the institutional bodies that they have created. Probably the most well-rounded and greatest or most developed institution that they have created is the New Development Bank. The bank itself was designed to mobilize resources within the member states to contribute particularly to infrastructure and sustainable development projects within the BRICS countries themselves, but also other emerging and developing economies. The institution has quite a unique shareholding structure, which we'll discuss in more detail later, which is quite important, but all of its members have an equal share within the bank, so therefore an equal voice within the bank. And it is outlined within the bank's policy itself that the bank wants to be integrated into the wider system of global governance and into wider institutions that underpin that system of global governance. Therefore, it's not meant to be a standalone institution completely separate to the current system of global governance, but a part of that overall structure, and it outlines that it partners with current institutions of global economic governance like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, as well as commercial banks. So what underpins the New Development Bank? What's its mission within global governance? Two major elements are usually outlined in all correspondence by the Development Bank, and is outlined within its Memorandum of Understanding in its creation, and is currently outlined within the mission statement of the New Development Bank. That is egalitarianism, that the bank is founded on the principle of equality and democracy amongst states. So the idea that decision-making should be held by the stakeholders, and that development is based on democratic decisions amongst the members of the bank. The other mission is that the bank should be open and approachable, that it should be open to anybody who wants to cooperate with the bank, and that it should be approachable to any type of project and any type of meaningful partnership. So that kind of plays into this idea that it shouldn't be tied to any political strings or conditions to what type of project they will fund in a given position, that it doesn't automatically rule anything out, that it is approachable as a bank to projects from any country that's willing, developing country that's looking for help for a project. So the bank itself is based on this idea of democracy and equality among states. It's focused on development issues, with particular focus on sustainable development and infrastructural projects. So how does the bank position itself within the wider system of global governance? We've talked about the bank actually being part of a system, willing to be part of the wider system. So does the bank itself differ from current development banks? Is it just a development bank like all other development banks, but just happens to be run by the BRICS countries? Or does it actually offer any meaningful change to the global governance system? Has it created any initiatives, any new ideas, any new norms or values that will change the overall global governance structure? Is it innovative in that sense? Or is it just simply another development bank that will give greater legitimacy to the current structure of global governance, which in a way isn't really offering any real change to the overall system. So if it is only giving legitimacy to the current system, you can't really call it a game changer. So what does the bank offer to the BRICS in terms of changing the overall structures to match these mission statements that the bank has outlined? Any development bank essentially or any international development bank is offering three types of goods. It's either offering material goods, which is essentially the money that the bank is offering, so the bonds and loans that the bank is offering. It's offering positional goods, so that's like a voice or representation internationally. So membership of the bank should increase a country's standing in a particular institution, or sorry, within a global governance system, and it's offering ideological goods. So that's new ideas or new ways of doing something that differ from other banks. The BRICS Bank in itself offers, the New Development Bank offers the BRICS opportunity to offer all three forms of goods, so ideological goods, positional goods, or material goods. But how that plays out, or how it differs from other banks, essentially depends on the structure of the bank itself. Within the paper, we offer quite a wide oversight of the theoretical framework that underpins this argument, but the basic assumption from this is that the New Development Bank offers what West needs, which is material goods because of lack of funds by Western development banks, and in exchange, the global governance system offers a positional goods to the BRICS members, increasing their overall representation in the international system. But the question is, in return for this, does the BRICS have to accept the ideological goods of the global governance structure, so Western values and norms around development, or can it offer new, innovative ideological goods that change the overall structure of global governance? So based on work done by Humphreys over a number of papers, we found that the governance structure of a multinational development bank really determines whether the bank can offer ideological goods in return for the positional and material goods that they offer. And when we began to take Humphrey's model and apply them to multilateral development banks and institutions in global economic governance, we found that institutions such as the World Bank, the IMF, the International Development Bank, and the CFF, for example, they had a model that was essentially borrower-borrower or borrower-non-borrower. So when it came to what type of structure the New Development Bank was, we did find that there was something that was game-changing or innovative, that the New Development Bank was essentially a borrower-non-borrower bank and a borrower-borrower bank. So what does this mean in terms of studying multilateral development banks? Essentially, it meant that the New Development Bank was non-mutually exclusive. It was open to both members in terms of borrowing. So you could be a member of the bank and borrow directly from the bank or lend into the bank, or you could be a non-member and lend into the bank and also borrow from the bank. We also found that the New Development Bank presented something quite unique, which was differed from other multilateral development bank, that was both reliant on its members to provide material goods, but also its members could raise those material goods on the marketplace. So what this meant was that when the bank wanted to raise funds, it could either borrow money directly from its members, or it could its members could borrow money on behalf of the bank by raising bonds held by the bank on the marketplace itself. So this was beyond the parameter of classical institutions. The NDB is not held to a single common region, which meant that the bank was also able to raise these funds on a number of marketplaces. But in predominantly the bank itself raised these funds in Western marketplaces. So money that was funded into the New Development Bank that didn't come directly from the members was raised by the members by backing bonds predominantly on Western marketplaces. So if the bank itself wanted to raise further funding and it wasn't coming directly from the members' exchequer, then those members could raise that fund as part of a New Development Bank bond and predominantly on Western marketplaces. So now that we discovered that the New Development Bank had this model of borrower and borrower non-borrower, which is quite unique, we began to look at whether this lending strategy gave the New Development Bank and therefore the BRICS the ability to change the rules by which New Development Banks operated, or change, add a new innovative element to new or to development banks. And so to do this, we looked at the New Development Bank's lending strategy. And we examined three factors looking at this lending strategy. The first was the shareholder structure. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the shareholder structure of the New Development Bank is quite rigid. The shareholders or the members of the BRICS, they have an equal share within the bank, so they each have 20% of the membership. There is no member holds a veto, therefore it holds up to its principle of equality and democracy, that decisions have to be made by all the members together to make a decision on a particular direction the bank needs to take in a particular area. It focuses on equal power amongst the shareholders. That's quite outlined within the bank themselves, and interviews that we did within the bank outlined that this principle was kept quite strongly in decision making, that rather than decisions being made overruling one member, that the kind of a common ground was always sorted, because no member wanted to be seen to be overriding the decision making of other members. That rigid shareholder structure means that the bank itself kind of follows along the mission statement outlined by the bank. Who is demanding the resources was the next element that we looked at. So who are the customers of the New Development Bank? Again, this idea that the bank was a borrower and a borrower non-borrower structure meant that the bank who borrows from the bank is quite open. It can be members, but because they can raise bonds on the marketplace, they in terms of where they get their capital from, so they can get it from the marketplace, or they can get it from members. meant that the bank was reliant on the material goods offered by the bank. How much money the bank can offer relies on the economic performance of the shareholders, but also the shareholders, the bank's ability to gain access to the marketplace, again, predominantly Western marketplaces, in order to secure a good credit rating, to borrow further capital, and also to therefore create a greater demand for both the bonds that they put onto the marketplace, but also the loans that they're giving out. Predominantly who's borrowing from the bank are the members itself, but we also have other developing states borrowing from the bank. Predominantly one of the reasons they're borrowing from the bank is part of the ideological goods that the bank offer. This is the idea of a new ideological good that is unique to multilateral development, which is this idea of the country systems approach, which I'll talk about in a little more detail in a moment. But this is the idea that a country's individual system should be taken into account when designing a loan or a project with the country, that it's not something that should be just conditions shouldn't be just set upon those countries themselves. The next major element that we looked at in the lending strategy was the provision of goods. So how are the goods actually given over to the country? So this is the actual, how is it lent directly to the person borrowing the money? In general, if we look at classical institutions, values, Western values in particular, are attached to those loans. In the New Development Bank model, particularly if we look at the green bonds that were issued in 2016, or the COVID bonds that were issued in 2020, the idea that countries' individual legal and sovereign structure should come into consideration in terms of how to design the loan must be taken into account, and the input from the government and also local governments should be taken into account when a loan is actually given, which is something is an innovative process, and no predominant political values placed on the loan, that the loan itself should be designed based on that country's individual structure rather than a Western structure imposed. So does this lending strategy give the BRICS structural power to change the rules of the game, or the values and norms that allow for collective action at a global governance structure? When we looked at the lending strategy, the three elements of the lending strategy, the shareholder membership, or who's demanding the goods, and the provision of the goods, we found that in terms of the shareholder membership, the cost of the positional goods, so that's representation within the bank, that the fact that the BRICS was based on this idea of equality and this very rigid structure of equal membership meant that the cost of giving positional goods to other countries was quite high. In order to increase the bank's power to change rules and norms in other countries, they need to have a greater number of members. But actually, the cost of increasing membership meant that there's a disincentive for BRICS members to open up membership of the New Development Bank to outside countries, because that meant it would reduce their own voice within the system. That means that this kind of rigid structure makes it quite difficult, not impossible, quite difficult for the New Development Bank to use membership of that bank to change rules and norms in other countries by offering those countries membership. The next is material goods. There's two barriers for the BRICS using the New Development Bank's material goods as a way of changing rules and norms. The first is the barrier is based on the borrower-borrower model within the borrower-borrower non-borrower model. The main people who demand goods or resources from the New Development Bank are the members itself. So the biggest customers of the New Development Bank are the BRICS nations already. And because the BRICS nations are the main demanders of the goods, the conditions that are attached to those goods have no real impact in creating new norms, because those norms already exist within the BRICS countries. So if you want to change the rules and norms within the wider system of global governance, you have to open up those resources and therefore the conditions attached to those resources to a larger number of countries. The second main barrier in using material goods to change rules and norms within global governance is the second element of the structure, so the borrower non-borrower model. So the BRICS use Western market mechanisms, particularly bond markets, to raise some of their material goods. These material goods are raised there to increase the bank's credit worthiness, but actually that means that they're subject to the market mechanisms of those countries and they're subject to the legal structures of those countries, which makes it quite difficult for them to change the overall structure of global governance, because the New Development Bank actually has to adhere then to Western mechanisms of the marketplace in order to achieve that creditworthiness. So using the vast resources that the BRICS have within the New Development Bank, if they're trying to rely on market mechanisms or Western market mechanisms, reduces their ability to use those material goods to change the behavior of other states. Finally, there's ideological goods. So this is the provision of goods, how they're actually given out, what conditions are attached to them. The NDB does offer ideological goods. The country system approach is a clear break from Western norms, which often impose Western understanding of good governance onto countries when they come for loans from Western institutions. So it's a clear initiative by the BRICS. It is changing the rules of the game to a certain extent. The country systems approach is an ideological good. It's targeted at countries that can't afford the Western ideological goods. They can't afford to adopt the Western policies of good governance. It comes at too high of a cost, whatever that cost is, political or financial. So therefore, it is offering some sort of game-changing element to the system of global governance. But actually, the New Development Bank is a very small bank with limited funds compared to large Western dominated banks like the World Bank. So its ability to impose the country systems approach on the wider global governance structure is limited. So reviewing the New Development Bank's lending structure, it doesn't have structural power in terms of positional goods to change the game. It doesn't have a independent enough material goods structure to change the game of global governance. It does offer a new innovative approach in terms of ideological goods, but the funds within the bank itself are quite limited to actually impose that those new ideas into the wider system. So to summarize, because I'm guessing I'm running out of time, the New Development Bank does offer an alternative circle for actors to exchange ideas around finance and development. It does offer a new model of development in terms of this borrower, non-borrower, borrower-borrower structure. It does offer alternative materials and positional goods to a certain extent. Unlike other multilateral development banks, it's based on principles that are outlined, which is equality and openness. So it is equal amongst its members. It is open to projects that are often not or can't be conducted by traditional institutions because of the political strings that are attached to those kind of projects. It is creating a new institution within the marketplace, but in general, the New Development Bank is it doesn't have enough funds to really change the rules and norms that underpin global governance. Its rigid structure prevents it from using membership alone to try to distribute its new norms and values, particularly this country systems approach. One of the biggest issues it has is its reliance on Western marketplaces to raise funds beyond the exchequer of the individual member states, which is becoming more and more important given the sanctions on Russia. The use of these Western market mechanisms actually gives greater legitimacy to the current system because it is using that system to justify its creditworthiness, and it's using that system to allow it to have legal and marketplace protection against the issues within their own domestic markets and their own domestic legal structures. So actually, its role in raising funds on Western marketplaces is really giving legitimacy to the older or current structures of global governance rather than changing those structures. So therefore, the NDB does offer the BRICS some structural power in terms of it allows it to show alternative paths towards development finance, and it does offer it a place to fund some of those ideological changes, but it's very much limited within the BRICS members itself. So its idea that it could go beyond that to be a game changer to multilateral finance or global governance in general is quite limited due to the small nature of the bank, but also due to just the way the bank has been designed and its reliance on Western market structures. I'm going to end my slideshow there, and hopefully I didn't go too far over time.
Should I go next, Luigi?
Yeah, I think after this very interesting talk, we can hand over to Michele Tedeschini, please.
So thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to apologize if I'll be coughing sometimes during my presentation. I say it in advance. Unfortunately, I'm still recovering from a coronavirus infection, and I carry a cough as a legacy. So forgive me in advance if this is going to disrupt my my presentation. So I mean my comments. I would like to thank Niall very much for joining us today, and also I would like to congratulate him on his scholarship. In my opinion, he's one of the leading commentators on the BRICS, and together with his co-authors and some other colleagues, and and so I'm very grateful and glad that I can be in conversation with him today. And of course, also many thanks to the BRICS Parma Research Group for hosting this conversation. So I would like to focus on three substantive points that might serve as a basis for a further discussion, and then maybe Niall can either develop these points or he can take them in any direction that he sees fit. And I mean, these are actually three interrelated considerations, but I try to keep them apart for clarity purposes, but they are not sort of sealed compartments. And so they can and they should be addressed together. And then also at the end, I would like to add a fourth point that is not much substantive, but it's more of a general consideration on methodology and the way that we scholars who study the BRICS approach this subject matter. So to start with my first comment, I would like to pick on to pick up on a sentence that is a part of the article on which Niall's presentation was based, in which Niall tells us that the New Development Bank can be used to understand the structural power of the BRICS. So I think this makes a lot of sense, of course. for what is worth, in my own research, I'm also zooming in on the New Development Bank, as are many other researchers at the moment. So I would like, though, to start by sort of flipping this statement in a way, and I would ask Niall if maybe at the present juncture we can say that the NDB is almost all there is to the BRICS, or it seems that this might be a way of reading the New Development Bank. So, so in other words, it seems that much of what is happening now that is concrete and tangible and debatable within the BRICS world is happening through the New Development Bank, so much so that even the widely discussed BRICS Plus projects, the extension of membership to other countries, which had been touted for a while, is happening now by way of admitting countries to membership in the bank. So we saw recently that Bangladesh and the United Arab Emirates have joined the bank with minimal shareholding, which I think does not really impinge upon what Niall was saying about the structure of the bank, because his article, he was telling me when we had a conversation, I think it was written in 2019 before this development, but I think this doesn't really change that. And then we know that also Egypt and Uruguay, I think, will follow suit, and perhaps other countries too. So my sense is, one may guess that maybe this pattern is going to become even more evident in the current geopolitical climate, in which establishing, let's say, political initiatives with a small group, with Russia as part of the group, might become politically awkward, if not unfeasible. So this is my first comment or consideration for further debate. To summarize it again, I think one cannot analyze the structural power of the BRICS without discussing the New Development Bank, because the New Development Bank seems to have become sort of the most prominent initiative within the BRICS platform. And again, this is a reflection. It might be completely off, so maybe Niall and also other anybody else who wants to intervene will touch on that point. But again, I started by flipping this consideration by Niall, and there is another side to this point, right? So clearly there are qualifications to the statement that I made. There are also other initiatives. In my own work, I look at the contingency reserve agreement, and probably something will have to be said about the way in which, and I think this confirms Niall's analysis, the way in which the NDB and the contingency reserve agreement seem to mirror quite neatly the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank in terms of the functions that they perform, at least. But I'm not going to develop on that. My second point is rather that even as the New Development Bank seems to be pretty much what the BRICS are about as a group at the moment, I guess one could also say that the New Development Bank is assuming more and more a life of its own, and that it seems it may even come out of the shade of the BRICS, so to speak. So, I mean, it doesn't even have BRICS in the name. It's not the BRICS Bank. And this is interesting because I think until not long ago, I think we were pretty much accustomed to reading many articles referring to the NDB as the BRICS Bank. And now it seems to me the trend is shifting in a way. Actually, yesterday, I was reading a commentary that was also posted on the Twitter profile of the BRICS Parma Research Group. And in that piece, the author, a Chinese scholar, Jane Tu, he called it the BRICS-led bank, which is, I think, a huge change because it gives the sort of the idea that this is something that started as an initiative of the BRICS group, but it is somehow turning into something bigger. And again, from a political standpoint, I think it may be easier at the present juncture, but also in general, from the perspective of both borrowers and also of the lenders, to present sorry, any given loan as money given by a development bank, as opposed to saying I'm getting money from China mostly, or getting money from, well, clearly Russia, even though Niall told us that actually the money often doesn't even come from the lenders. It comes from markets. You know, it's been collected on markets, but still, it's easier to say I got it from a bank than saying I got it from it was channeled to me through, say, China. And I mean, in this sense, after all, even the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank are institutions of the United Nations, but they are institutions that retain their own independence to a certain extent. And I guess that many commentators tend to refer to the World Bank, for example, and to see the World Bank as something that is within the UN umbrella, but it's still quite distinct from the UN machinery. Certainly, within legal scholarship, when scholars mention the UN, they tend to think about the General Assembly, about the Security Council, perhaps about the International Court of Justice and the tribunals, but you never have the feeling that financial and monetary institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund are part of the picture, are in the mind of the speaker when the UN is mentioned. And I think these also, in a way, I think this also obfuscates the weight carried by the United States within the World Bank to a certain extent. So my question is, as I conclude this second point, will, and again, I pose it to Niall, but it's open there for discussion, will something similar happen, or do we expect it to happen with respect to the New Development Bank? So is it likely that the New Development Bank will pitch itself more and more as an independent financial institution spawned by the BRICS, but also that within this move there will be an attempt by China to conceal its dominance, assuming that there is such dominance within the NDB? And I guess this argument relates to the question, how does the New Development Bank seek legitimation, or how does a new multilateral development institution more generally seek legitimation? So this was my second point. And then, sorry, the third point concerns the exit threat that Niall mentions multiple times in his article with his co-authors, and also he touched upon it in the course of his presentation today. So one characteristic of the institutionalization of the BRICS through, for example, establishing the New Development Bank, but also the contingency reserve agreements, is that the BRICS seem to signal the possibility to opt out of existing institutions and financial channels and avenues of cooperation, and to signal the ability to follow their own preferred path. And of course, we heard Niall explain how, well, it turns out that the threat is not very credible because the BRICS economies are too enmeshed in the web of international finance and money flows to just walk away from existing arrangements. But also Niall points at the ways in which the structure of the New Development Bank somehow lends support to Bretton Woods institutions and a dominant view of development finance. And I do find this explanation very convincing in this sense. But still, I think a key question, in my opinion, and here I would say we get to the elephant in the room whenever we talk international politics today, and this is something that Professor Amirante mentioned in his introduction, and I'm grateful that he broached the subject, is what could happen today in terms of BRICS cooperation in light of the economic sanctions applied against Russia because of course, the war in Ukraine. So. And this is the way I would frame the question to Niall, or I would broach it is this going to be some sort of a stress test for the New Development Bank? And in a way, my hunch is that the existence of formalized institutions might become a source of embarrassment for the BRICS in this situation, because bear with me as I walk you through for a moment through a thought experiment and present an argument that I think the Russian Federation or the Russian government may put forward, perhaps behind the scenes, but not necessarily. So Russia may want to claim, so the argument may go, well, as the BRICS, we've always been against conditionality, against interference into sovereignty and domestic affairs, because these are the markers of Bretton Woods institutions. They are not our way of doing things. So Russia could claim, well, the feud with Ukraine is our business. And again, I'm speculating here. I'm not advocating this position, but this is our business. It has nothing to do with other countries. There could be an argument to be made that if China ever wants to move on Taiwan, similar considerations would apply again. So Russia could say, well, we have the New Development Bank, we have the contingency reserve agreements. These are institutions that work in a mechanical way, so to speak. They don't need political decisions to be made. And we have always pursued a de-dollarization of trade and exchange. Why would you renege on your commitments now and sort of take a position that, in a way, slows down the BRICS project just in light of the political situation that has been created by the war in Ukraine? So this is my sense that an argument could be made. At the same time, and this is a reality check, I think, one of the main points that I think Niall makes is that, you know, the BRICS do not have their own ways of guaranteeing to the markets that the new development bank will remain solvent and that the capital they collect from financial markets will be repaid. So we saw that as soon as the sanctions started hitting, the new development bank immediately released a statement indicating that it would put any new transaction in Russia on hold because of the ensuing uncertainties. And yet the Fitch, the rating agency, immediately downgraded the bank's long-term default rating from stable to negative. So it turns out that building a coherent machinery to, let's say, to chip away at Western financial and monetary hegemony is quite a challenge. And when the BRICS launched a pandemic recovery fund in 2020 through the New Development Bank, they issued $2 billion US dollars in bonds that were placed through Western banks such as Citi, Goldman Sachs, and Barclays. And sorry. And these actors are always responsive to devaluations that are made in rating agencies in the West. So even if in that particular case, more than half of the money came from Asian markets, still you cannot simply bypass Western financial centers. And this is a huge hurdle for the BRICS. So this long digression was just to note how, you know, moments of change spur new developments within international institutions. It was the same with the IMF, which did not really undertake its role as lender of last resort and, let's say, policeman of structural adjustment in the developing world until the late 70s. So to try and frame this reflection as a question, again, is this going to be a stress test for the NDB, and could it change the course of its development as an institution? Could it lead to a marginalization of Russia within the bank and the BRICS group, or maybe to the opposite, to a strengthening of ties with China and the other members? So this is, again, a question that I broach. And these were my three substantive reflections. And just to close very briefly, I want to add a fourth point that is more methodological. So I tried to sketch a few questions which were suggested to me by Niall's very insightful presentation and by his scholarship more generally. And I think the bigger question that is in the background is, how do we study these phenomena? No? We know that there is a tendency, this is something that Niall already touched upon, in existing scholarship to either dismiss the BRICS out of hand, so saying the group is irrelevant, the group failed, or another tendency is glorifying the BRICS as, you know, the new world order, the world order of tomorrow that is in the making, and all this consideration also to a conversation I had with Niall in preparation of this meeting. And of course, I think much more difficult is addressing the question, how do we assess the initiative and effectiveness of the BRICS? You know, by what standard can they be considered a failure or a success, or irrelevant or marginally irrelevant? And here I would like to conclude by commending Niall for his effort with his co-authors to outline a very structured framework for his analysis. So maybe he can tell us a bit more about the way he approaches this question. This is a bit of a meta question. So how does he decide on his methodology? And I would also highlight in conclusion that at University College Cork in Ireland, when he's based, Niall has also taught, among other subjects, quantitative and qualitative research methods in the study of political science. So he's a highly qualified guest to discuss questions of methodology and approach. And there is also an issue, a question of teaching, I think, quite apart from research, right? How do we teach and how do we invite students to deal with this subject? So these were my thoughts, and I'll stop here. And again, thank you very much for Niall for presenting your findings and for sharing them with us.
Thank you. Do you want me to respond directly to that, or do you want to take questions from the floor? I don't know what your normal process is.
Yeah, maybe we can ask the audience if they want to to raise some questions. Let me also thank Michele Tedeschini for this rich discussion that was as long as the speech by Niall. So thank you very much. And maybe someone wants to raise some questions or just to add something before then we leave for the final answers. We leave the floor to Niall. I don't know if anybody wants to comment.
If I may, I would like to ask a question.
Okay.
Thanks to Professor Duggan and Professor Tedeschini for their intervention and their clear presentations and discussions. I was wondering if you think that BRICS countries are thinking about changing the aspects that you clearly underline in your presentation that are limiting the role of the New Development Bank as a game changer. So, in other words, do you see developments or possible evolutions on the horizon on this side if they are trying to, if they are concerned about the negative aspects or the limits that are impeding them to represent through the New Development Bank a game changer? So this is my question. Thank you.
Okay. Some more questions? Maybe we can group all the questions and then Niall can answer back.
Good afternoon. Sorry, I hope you can hear. Oh, please. Can I speak?
Matteo can go on and then we'll...
Oh, okay. Okay, please. Well, thank you very much in the first place for the presentation and the comments. My question is a really brief question, as is really closely related to the comments of Professor Tedeschini, and it is about a potential or a concrete or a potential relation between the developments of the New Development Bank as an institution and the other transnational cooperation strategies of the BRICS countries. Well, the question is motivated by the fact that when Professor Duggan discussed about a sort of decision-making approach and of the NDB and a sort of refusal of the conditional lending, well, these are features that also to say connote the Belt and Road strategy, the Belt and Road initiative brought forward by China for more than a decade. So I would like to ask whether or not there is a sort of explicit or maybe implicit correspondence or mutual influence between these, well, the NDB and the transnational cooperation strategies of the BRICS countries. Thank you very much.
Next question.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you. It's a pleasure to see again Professor Lucia and also Julia, who sent me the possibility of coming here today, listening to the speakers. It was very interesting. My point would be that if we come back to the beginning of the BRICS, we could think on the context of 2008 crisis. And the preoccupation of these countries to make a block, it was, in the case dollar crashes, what would happen to our economies? So they were worried with this, and they were thinking on commerce intra-BRICS without being intermediated by dollar. And nowadays, as we have a different context, I have been reading that this possibility maybe is coming back. I would like to know if you believe that this is something that could reinforce the possibilities for the bank and reinforce the group as we ask more place in international global governance, or this is still a demand they have, but is still far away of being concrete? This would be my point. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. And if there are no other questions, I can leave the floor to Niall Duggan for the last replies, please.
Okay, all very interesting questions, and some of them are interlinked. The question about the limitations of the BRICS and the ability of the BRICS adapting to this, I think that follows quite well into the overall theme of the questions. The BRICS are definitely adapting to those limitations. So the rigid structures, for example, they are allowing more members into the bank, and more members are joining. However, this changes the overall mission of the bank, or the overall structure of the bank. So the bank was supposed to be designed on equality amongst members and democracy amongst members. So all members are supposed to have the same say and structure within the bank, and that's how the bank was originally designed to operate. That's what made it different. That was supposed to be what made it different to other developing banks. Everybody who joined had the same say within the structure. So the bank has adapted to this limitation of being able to change norms and values through the membership of the bank by allowing more and more people to fund the bank directly. So that's why we see UEA and joining, but this idea that each of those members will be an equal member, that element is what's changing. And to a certain extent, well, that was a barrier in allowing them to distribute those ideals. It meant that they have deconstructed one of the main attractive elements of the development bank, or one of the things that made it an alternative to the current form of Western banks. So by increasing membership without increasing or without keeping equality amongst members, it kind of devalues part of what the bank was originally supposed to be, one of the attractive natures of the bank. The New Development Bank's approach compared to the Belt and Road Initiative, again, it ties kind of into the overall structure of the bank and those limitations that the bank has. The BRI, in some ways, is a bit of it's a lot of things painted under the same umbrella that aren't necessarily coherent compared to the New Development Bank. So the New Development Bank is a thing with people that work in it and raises funds as a legal entity. The BRI is not. So it differs in that sense. The BRI isn't reliant on raising funds on Western markets in any sense. It's based on the exchequer of one country. And those projects can be co-funded by other countries, but actually the projects are entirely within the remit of China, which makes it quite different from the New Development Bank. And the New Development Bank's material goods are partly funded by Western markets. Therefore, they fall under the legal structures of those Western markets and the political conditions that are tied to raising funds on those markets. So you do have to, if you are raising a bond on a Western marketplace, there are legal constraints on how that bond is raised and how it's given out. And there's certain environmental standards on the projects. So when we talk about lack of conditionality in terms of the funds that are given out by the New Development Bank, that's not entirely true, because there are political conditions to an extent put on those funds. They're just not put there by BRICS countries. The question on Russia, which is the topical question at the moment, I think the push to have Argentina become a member of the BRICS, as a formal member of the BRICS, not just the bank, but the wider membership, I think that will tell a lot on the direction that the BRICS are going concerning Russia. Officially, all members of the BRICS are quite happy to have Argentina join the BRICS, but unofficially, and from my discussion with people within different diplomatic services, it seems that Brazil and particularly Russia are not too happy with this idea of Argentina joining the BRICS. The main country pushing it is China, and from what I understand, one of the reasons for China to push Argentinian membership is to water down the overall membership of the BRICS. In particular, trying to reduce the presence of Russia. Argentina will be quite well linked with China, and that it would be seen as a friendly voice for China within the BRICS, and to increase the membership would reduce the voices of the others, and South Africa in particular is concerned about this, but also Russia. And despite all the public displays of solidarity with Russia, it seems that China is doing everything it can to deconnect themselves from the Russian economy and disassociate themselves from Russia, including within the Development Bank. How long this plays out and whether the Russian presence in the new Development Bank affects the bank itself. As somebody who teaches methodology, I would often tell the students, try not to predict something in your final dissertation. It's not necessarily the best way of achieving a nice methodological structure. But the bank itself, if it's still reliant on raising money on Western marketplaces as part of their bonds, then it will have difficulty the longer Russia remains within the new Development Bank. It will constantly face being downgraded in terms of the bank itself. So the bank will be left with an option of either distancing itself from Russia, which might see it become this independent bank and become seen as not something attached to China or Russia. And if you look at the recruitment levels into the bank itself, you can see more and more non-BRICS people working within the bank. So that could be part of the wider association, particularly with new members donating money into the bank itself. Or they go the opposite way and they begin to try to use the new Development Bank as a way of breaking the dependency on the dollar as part of a wider move of the BRICS to do this, to disassociate themselves from the dollar. I don't see that happening, mainly because I don't think the BRICS members actually trust each other's systems to an extent that they're going to rely on each other's systems to both their legal structures, but also the economies in the other countries, to completely abandon the dollar. I don't think there is a system developed that they can warn each other about economic problems within their own countries. I don't think there is that open and transparency, and I think they're all very much aware that each country has economic problems that could spill over into the other economies. And I think each of the BRICS members wants that ability to have a safe haven in terms of Western markets. And I don't think that's anything that is going to be overcome in the short term. In terms of the methodological question, it's a good one, and it's something I think those of us who research the BRICS need to kind of sort out in terms as a community. We need to be very clear when we're talking about the BRICS as an entity, or when we're talking the BRICS as individual states. And when it comes to the BRICS as an entity, the new Development Bank is pretty much it. That's what we're looking at. That's the big achievement. That's something that is an entire is a BRICS created institution that is active, that is functioning, that is providing an alternative to the West to a certain extent. And we don't really see that with anything else. Perhaps the BRICS Plus institutions. I have a Russian colleague who's been promoting that for some time, but again, there hasn't been any fundamental development on this beyond it being a forum. And I think to the wider point that you began with, this idea that people look at the BRICS as either, you know, it's the next best thing, or it's completely worthless and we shouldn't concentrate on it at all. It's definitely not what it had been predicted in 2008. It's not going to be this huge game changer as a group. It's not something, they don't cooperate well enough as a group to change the system. But it's something that's important because it is an alternative. It is a place for these countries to cooperate. It does offer alternative ideas and structures to a certain extent, but it's a way of looking at how these individual member states try to create a foundation for themselves away from the West. That doesn't mean the BRICS will become this alternative to the West, but members within the BRICS might come to the fore to lead an alternative to the West, particularly thinking China, which has since 2008 has just left the others in terms of economic development and overall influence in the world economy. It really, China is a country that could perhaps be that game changer within itself, even beyond the BRICS at this stage. Whether it desires that or whether it wants to achieve that is a different question. But that wider question, is the BRICS this big thing or something we should ignore? No, it's something that's very, very important, but it's not something we should be overstating as changing the world. Did I answer all the questions, or I think I got to them all. Did I miss anything, or?
Well, I think you were quite exhaustive in your answer. In fact, all these afternoon speeches and reflections open more questions about how it's going to develop this relation between the BRICS as a system, as a whole, and the rest of the world that is restructuring itself after the last event. So it was a really very, very interesting afternoon, and I want to thank again Niall and Michele for reaching us with their reflections, and then I leave the floor to Lucia, maybe for a final word. Please, Lucia.
Thank you. No, I only want to say thank you to Neil Duggan for his interesting and inspiring speech. And thank you also to Michele Tedeschini for his important role of discussant. And last but not least, to Professor Domenico Amirante, the major expert of India in Italy. But I'm very, very happy, let me say this, because that our research center has made it possible to realize this interesting webinar attended by people from all over the world, because Gianmatteo Sabatino was from China, Michele Tedeschini at the moment is in USA, Neil Duggan is in Ireland, and what else? Gabrielle is from Brazil, and we are from Italy. And so I think that this testifying the interest that the BRICS continue to attract. And so I think that the best thing is to continue to study this subject that is so important for our future. Thank you very, very much to all for this interesting webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for hosting me.
Grazie. We hope to see you also in Italy.
Yes, hopefully some stage.
Thank you also to Marco Cari. Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.